Is that the billionaire's deaf daughter? Poor thing. All that money and still broken. The words weren't whispered. They weren't said with kindness. They dropped like poison into the glittering air of Manhattan's most exclusive gala. Zariah Thompson, a 4-year-old black waitress with almond-toned skin and eyes that saw more than most dared to, heard them as she balanced a tray of rosé and sparkling water. She paused just for a beat before adjusting her posture and continuing across the ballroom. But inside, a storm was rising. She was used to this. The casual cruelty, the quiet racism dressed up in smiles and suits, the way wealth made people think they had the right to label others, especially anyone who looked like her. And tonight, she wasn't the only one being ignored. Seated alone near the velvet-curtained edge of the room, partially obscured by a massive floral arrangement, was a girl in a soft gold dress. Her posture was perfect, her face expressionless. But her eyes, those sharp, aware, intelligent eyes, scanned the room like she was reading a book no one else could see. She was watching lips, watching hands, watching a world that had no intention of including her. And not one person was speaking to her. They all knew who she was, Aurelia Cross, daughter of Magnus Cross, the billionaire CEO of Crosstech Industries, a man whose name opened doors and built empires. He was all over the news, all over the room, shaking hands, sipping scotch, and basking in admiration. But his daughter? She sat in silence, a princess in exile. That's when Zariah did something no one expected. She walked up, she crouched to eye level, and she signed. "Hi, I'm Zariah." And Aurelia's entire face lit up like someone had finally switched on the sound. Welcome to Hidden Worth, the channel that brings real, raw, and often ignored black stories to light. This story isn't just about privilege or disability. It's about what happens when someone on the bottom of society's ladder reaches out and changes everything. If you feel this story already, stick around. Because by the end, you won't forget Zariah Thompson. Zariah Thompson didn't grow up around chandeliers or champagne. She grew up in the Bronx, in a third-floor walk-up where the pipes clanged at night and laughter had to fight through thin walls and thick worries. Her mama raised her on love, grit, and the belief that no one was too poor to show kindness or too important to learn respect. She didn't dream of becoming rich. She dreamed of becoming fluent, in more than just English. She wanted to speak Spanish, sign language, and maybe someday even French. Why? Because communication was power. It meant connection. It meant survival. So when Zariah started working at the Parkhurst Grand Hotel, a marble-coated oasis for the ultra-rich nestled in Midtown Manhattan, she came armed with more than just a winning smile and a spotless uniform. She came with ears that listened and eyes that really saw. The hotel's annual Winter Legacy Gala was the kind of event that could pay her rent in one night if she pulled enough doubles. And tonight, it was hosted by Magnus Cross, the billionaire founder of Crosstech. Known for revolutionizing artificial intelligence and marrying a supermodel. His name carried weight. His wealth was old, but his company was new, innovative, untouchable. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Everyone but his daughter. Seated in the most ornate ballroom in the city ceiling, hand-painted like a Renaissance chapel, glasses tall enough to be centerpieces, Aurelia Cross sat perfectly still. Not out of shyness, but habit. The habit of being unseen. She was just 16, a high school junior with eyes like polished obsidian and hair braided back in a sleek crown. Her dress was worth more than Zariah's car. But what struck Zariah most wasn't the fashion. It was the silence. Not the quiet kind. The isolating kind. Aurelia had been born deaf. That wasn't the secret. The secret was that no one, not even her father, had ever bothered to learn how to speak to her in her language. American Sign Language. And so, at this glittering celebration of legacy and power, surrounded by CEOs, celebrities, and senators, Aurelia Cross may as well have been invisible. Until Zariah saw her, and chose, for reasons even she couldn't explain, not to walk away. Celeste Cross was used to silence, but not the kind she chose. It wasn't just the absence of sound that surrounded her, it was the absence of acknowledgement, of effort, of care. She had been born into privilege, yes. Her last name could open doors in every Ivy League hallway and Silicon Valley boardroom, but all it really did was lock her behind a glass wall. People saw her, admired her even, but no one truly reached her. Not her teachers, not her peers, and certainly not her father. Tonight was just another reminder. She watched from her corner table as the room sparkled with laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations that never included her. Every so often, someone would glance her way and smile awkwardly, as if checking off a box. Occasionally, a well-meaning donor would wave exaggeratedly at her from across the ballroom, mouthing some version of "Hi, sweetie," as if being deaf also meant being 5 years old. Her father, Magnus, was across the room, commanding, charming, magnetic. He moved through the crowd like a conductor in his element. His smile was sharp, his handshake firm, and his eyes? They never found hers. And why would they? He had tried once when she was first diagnosed at 3 years old, hired specialists, flew in doctors, even considered a cochlear implant. But the moment they told him she would never be normal, his interest began to fade. Instead of learning sign language, he learned how to delegate. There was always someone to handle Celeste: tutors, nannies, interpreters. He provided the best equipment, the best schools, the best therapists, everything but his presence. To the public, she was the quiet, elegant daughter of a visionary. To him, she had become an inconvenience he felt guilty about, but couldn't confront. So he did what powerful men often do when something makes them uncomfortable: he avoided it. Celeste had long since given up expecting more. Tonight she sat perfectly still, like one of the statues in the hotel's courtyard, poised, polished, dismissed. Every movement around her reminded her of how alone she truly was. Laughter echoed, flashbulbs popped, speeches were made, toasts were raised, and through it all, Celeste sat there, present but not included. She didn't know the name of the waitress who had just locked eyes with her. She didn't know yet that someone had seen her differently, but in that moment she hoped. Zariah had served dozens of tables that night, but something about that young woman in the corner kept pulling at her attention. Celeste looked like she belonged to a different world, one Zariah had only ever seen through glass windows or magazine covers. Her gown shimmered in soft gold under the lights. Her posture was perfect. Her skin glowed like porcelain. But it was her eyes, those quiet, lonely eyes, that made Zariah stop in her tracks. Something was wrong, and then she noticed. No one was talking to her. Not really. People gestured, smiled politely, waved, but no one engaged. Not even the man who had arrived in the black Rolls-Royce and immediately become the room's center of gravity. Magnus Cross, her father. Zariah had seen a lot in her 3 years working events like this. Celebrities, senators, CEOs. She'd seen the glitz, the cruelty, the superficial kindness. But this was different. This was neglect disguised as decorum. So Zariah did something no one else had done all night. She approached, quietly, gently, like walking up to a bird you didn't want to scare away. Celeste looked up, startled. Her expression shifted almost immediately, guarded, then confused, then curious. Zariah smiled. Then she raised her hands. "Hello, my name is Zariah. Are you okay?" The signs were not perfect. Her movements were a little clumsy, but they were unmistakable. For a beat, Celeste just stared. Then her eyes welled. Not with sadness, with relief. She signed back, slowly at first, then faster when she realized Zariah could follow. "You know sign language?" Zariah nodded, grinning. "A little. My cousin is deaf. Taught me growing up. I'm rusty, though. You'll have to be patient." Celeste laughed, a soundless, radiant laugh that lit up her whole face. Zariah leaned in closer, switching between signing and gentle words. "Do you want something to drink? Something other than champagne?" Celeste nodded eagerly. Zariah returned with a glass of ginger ale, setting it down with care. And just like that, something invisible cracked. A wall that had stood between Celeste and the world began to fall. For the first time that night, maybe the first time in a long time, Celeste felt seen. Not as the billionaire's deaf daughter, not as a symbol of pity, but as a person. Zariah didn't know it yet, but this moment was going to change both their lives. Forever. Zariah barely had time to savor the warmth of her brief connection with Celeste before reality came crashing back. She was returning to the main floor when it started. A woman in a backless emerald dress, clearly old money, stopped her mid-step, raising one perfectly waxed eyebrow. "Excuse me," the woman said, voice sharp as glass. "You're not supposed to be chit-chatting with the guests. You're here to serve." Zariah froze, caught off guard. Yes, ma'am. I was just... But the woman cut her off. We don't need personal stories with the help, she said louder, enough for nearby guests to hear. Laughter flickered in the air. Not loud, not overt, but cruel all the same. Zariah nodded and stepped back. Her cheeks burned, not from shame but from restraint. She had learned the hard way that speaking up too quickly, especially when you're young, black, and wearing an apron could cost you everything. She returned to her station near the bar, jaw clenched, eyes scanning for Celeste, needing something, anything to hold on to. And then it got worse. One of the male guests, a hedge fund type with too much cologne and too little soul, leaned in as she passed with a tray of champagne. "Sweetheart," he said with a leer. "I didn't know this place offered entertainment too." His friends chuckled. One of them snapped his fingers. "Spin around, girl. Let's see what that dress is hiding." Zariah stopped walking. For a heartbeat, time froze. Then she turned, smiled with that same deadpan professionalism she'd perfected over the years, and kept walking. But inside, something twisted. This wasn't just about her. This was about every woman who'd ever been made to feel small. Every black girl who'd been told to stay in her place. She passed Celeste again on her route. The girl was watching, her eyes wide, confused, angry. She had seen it happen. Zariah paused just long enough to sign 2 words as she passed. "It's okay." But they both knew it wasn't. Not even close. And what neither of them realized in that moment was that the power dynamics in that room were about to shift. Because for the first time, someone was going to speak up. Not with volume, but with truth. And the whole room would hear it whether they wanted to or not. Marcus Barrington had arrived late. The billionaire CEO of Barrington Tech rarely made a showy entrance, but tonight, the buzz of his arrival swept through the room like an electric current. Cameras discreetly shifted. Conversations softened. People turned. He didn't walk with arrogance, he didn't need to. His tailored charcoal suit, quiet confidence, and the weight of power that followed him into every room did the talking for him. But what most didn't notice, what no one dared to comment on, was that he came in alone. No family. No +1. And certainly not his daughter. He stood near the sidebar, speaking with the mayor and 2 top hedge fund managers, when he saw her. Celeste, sitting in a chair near the edge of the room, as if intentionally hidden. Her back was straight, chin high, but her eyes, he saw it in her eyes. She was shrinking inside. Then he noticed Zariah, and the way Celeste's entire demeanor had shifted the moment the waitress signed something to her. It was brief, simple, but Marcus noticed it. What he didn't expect, what no one did, was what happened next. Another guest, already tipsy, reached out and grabbed Zariah's wrist as she tried to walk past. The laughter that followed was loud enough to draw glances, but not loud enough to spark concern. Except Marcus heard it. He turned, just in time to see the man tug at Zariah's wrist, sloshing champagne onto her apron. "Come on, sweetheart," the man slurred. "Don't be shy." Zariah's face froze. Her other hand clenched the tray tightly, knuckles white. "Let me go," she said calmly. The man didn't. But Celeste moved. Quickly, sharply. She stood up and walked straight toward them. Everyone nearby turned to stare. The deaf girl, the one they all ignored, was suddenly the center of attention. She reached them, looked at the man's hand on Zariah's wrist, then up into his face. And without a word, she signed something sharp and fast, her expression fierce. The man blinked, confused. "What?" Zariah turned her head, stunned. And that's when Marcus stepped forward. "Enough," he said. Calm, cold, dangerous. The room went still. Marcus Barrington was now watching, speaking. And in that moment, the crowd finally realized. This wasn't just a waitress. And that wasn't just a quiet girl in the corner. Something was shifting. And no one in that room was ready for what came next. The crowd had returned to their conversations, but something about the air in that room had changed. The silence that followed Marcus Barrington's voice still lingered, like a crack in a glass window, thin, but impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Marcus stood at the edge of the ballroom, his gaze fixed on his daughter, who had now returned to her seat. But her face, once unreadable, held something new, a quiet defiance. He hadn't seen that look since she was 7. After the accident. Back then, the world had shifted in ways neither of them understood. Celeste had survived the car crash that killed her mother, but the trauma left her completely deaf. In the weeks that followed, doctors used sterile words, sensorineural hearing loss, irreversible, language regression. Specialists flooded their home. Therapists came and went. Hearing aids, cochlear implant consultations, flashcards, audiograms, progress reports, and through it all, Celeste never cried. Not once. She had just shut down. Marcus remembered the first time she tried to sign something to him. He hadn't understood it. He hadn't even known she was learning ASL in secret from one of the therapists. He'd said, "Just speak, you still remember words." But she hadn't. He remembered how her small hands trembled, how she looked at him as if waiting for something: approval, support, love. He gave her silence. From that moment on, she became the problem. At least, that's how his world saw her. In boardrooms, his advisors told him that bringing her to events would raise too many questions. Investors whispered about distractions. Publicists encouraged a narrative that erased her presence altogether. "She's vulnerable," they said. "The press could twist it. Better to keep your private life private." So, he listened. And Celeste faded into the background of her own life. He provided the best tutors, sent her to the best schools, even built a foundation for children with disabilities all under her name. But never once had he learned her language. He built walls of opportunity around her and convinced himself they were bridges. Now, as he watched her across the ballroom, interacting with Zariah, her face animated, alive, he realized something painful. She had never been the problem. He had. And for the first time in his career, in his life, Marcus Barrington wasn't sure if he knew how to fix what he'd broken. The music had returned, soft jazz flowing like water over the tension still lingering in the air. Glasses clinked, laughter resumed, but near the marble staircase, where the chandelier light dimmed just enough to feel private, something unspoken crackled in the space between Zariah and Marcus Barrington. He stood tall, every inch, the billionaire CEO, the world-revered perfect suit, polished shoes, commanding posture. But Zariah didn't flinch. Not this time. "You saw what happened," she said, her voice calm, but every syllable sharp enough to cut. "You saw them humiliate your daughter." Marcus exhaled, slow and controlled, like a man trying to keep his balance on a tightrope. "I'm aware." "No, sir. You watched," Zariah corrected. "That's different. Watching is what bystanders do when someone's drowning. You have the power to act. But you froze." Marcus's eyes flickered. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially not by someone who wore a name tag and served champagne. But there was something in Zariah's tone that stopped him from dismissing her. "You don't know me," he said finally. "But I know her," Zariah replied, her voice lowering. "I know what it's like to walk into a room and feel like a foreign body in your own skin. I know what it's like to be labeled a problem, ignored, underestimated, excluded." Marcus stayed silent, but his gaze was unwavering. "She lights up when someone speaks her language," Zariah continued. "Did you even notice that? Did you see how she laughed when I signed something dumb about the hors d'oeuvres?" "She laughed?" Marcus asked, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. Zariah nodded. Not out of politeness, not to blend in, but because someone finally saw her, really saw her. For a moment, Marcus looked years older, tired, unmasked. "I've spent millions on specialists," he said quietly. "Therapists, technology, schools, and none of it taught you how to say 'I love you' in her language," Zariah answered, not cruelly, but honestly. "You don't need money for that, Mr. Barrington. You just need to care enough to try." A beat passed, then another. Zariah didn't break eye contact. "Start there." And with that, she turned, leaving him standing alone. No cameras, no investors, no applause. Just a father, for once, forced to see the daughter he'd spent years looking through. 3 days after the gala, the Barrington penthouse was unusually quiet. No meetings, no conference calls, just Marcus, alone in his private study, staring at an untouched espresso. The silence pressing harder than any boardroom negotiation ever had. The door creaked open, and Celeste stepped inside. She didn't knock. She never had to. Not because she was welcomed, but because she was usually unnoticed. Today was different. Zariah had encouraged her, texting her earlier that morning. Show him who you are, not what they say you are. Celeste carried a portfolio, matte black leather, the edges worn soft from use. She held it close, like armor. Marcus looked up, startled but not annoyed. "Celeste," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Is something wrong?" She shook her head, then paused. Slowly, she pulled her phone out, typed, and handed it to him. "I want to show you what I do when no one is watching." He looked at the screen, then at her, and nodded. She opened the portfolio. Inside were paintings, sketches, digital illustrations layered with mixed media. Each piece was a burst of color and complexity, grief and hope tangled in vivid lines. One depicted a girl underwater, screaming, while the surface above teemed with people who couldn't hear her cries. Another was a swirling mass of sign language fingers, layered over newspaper headlines that screamed, "Mute" and "Burden." Marcus stared, then he sat down. He flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes widening. Here, a sketch of her mother, whom Celeste barely remembered. There, a watercolor of her childhood room, rendered entirely from memory, with shadows creeping from the corners. And finally, a full-spread digital print of a girl herself standing in the middle of a stage with the word "loud" shining behind her in bold, glitchy neon. The message was clear. "I had no idea," he said quietly. Celeste typed something again and held it up. "You never asked." Marcus didn't look away. "You're incredible." For the first time in years, Celeste's lips curved into a full, unguarded smile. Then, slowly, she signed something simple, something personal. "This is my voice." And Marcus, without hesitation, signed back, clumsy, hesitant. But his fingers formed the shape of understanding. "I'm listening." In that moment, no translation was needed. The next evening, the Barrington residence felt different. The grand foyer, marble floors, and dramatic lighting still spoke of wealth. But tonight, the silence inside felt charged. Something was shifting. Marcus Barrington walked into his daughter's private studio, the sunroom off his glass-walled study that he had seldom entered before. He found Celeste standing by a window, her sketchbook opened on a drafting table, light from the city skyline behind her. She looked up as he entered, expression steady, curious. He hesitated a moment in the doorway, as though he were stepping into unfamiliar territory. He cleared his throat. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Celeste nodded. He crossed the floor slowly, eyes on the pages of her art laid out across the table, canvases leaning against the walls. Her style was raw, emotional colors bleeding into one another, abstract shapes morphing into figures and hands. The work was powerful, vulnerable. He set himself down on a stool she had pulled out for him earlier this week. "I've been watching," he said. "Not spying. Just observing what I never allowed myself to see." Celeste's eyes flickered. She leaned back, her arms folded lightly as though uncertain whether to open or close. Marcus continued. "Last night, when I saw Zariah talking to you, when you stood up in the party, something changed. I realized I've been hiding from everything I should have faced." She didn't respond aloud. She watched him, her shoulders rigid yet unyielding. He picked up one of her smaller sketches, a charcoal figure fading into negative space. "This one," he said, voice rough. "Feels like you reaching through silence." Celeste's eyes softened. She signed slowly. "You see me." Marcus nodded, then confronted the weight he had carried for years. "I spent so long trying to fix things, to buy solutions, to outsource silence with therapy, money, tutors. I acted like I was doing everything, when all I needed to do was learn your language." He placed the sketch down gently and turned to her. I want to learn ASL with you, if you'll have me. Not as your father paying for privilege, but as a student learning your voice." Celeste's chest rose and fell. Tears glistened at the corner of her eyes. She signed, slowly, "With me." Marcus nodded. "Yes, slowly, with you." He closed the distance and touched her hand gently, with reverence. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough before." For the first time in years, she nodded. Their eyes locked. No room for walls, no space for pretense. That night, Marcus pulled his laptop from his desk. He opened an ASL tutorial video. They sat side by side, hands trembling as they mimicked small signs. "Hello, I am sorry. Thank you. Love you." Her fingers guided his. His fingers hesitated, then slowly found shape. Her encouragement, steady, gentle. In that sunlit room, father and daughter learned each other's language. It was not perfect. It would take time, patience, stumbles. But it was real. And it was the turning point Marcus had needed to step out of his fortress of regret and into the long road of repair. 6 months later, the auditorium of the Oakland Center for Arts and Equity buzzed with excitement. It was a warm spring evening, and the annual Youth Voices Through Art showcase was in full swing. Students, teachers, parents, and media representatives filled the seats, each waiting to witness the closing speech by a name that had quietly become legendary in local circles: Celeste Barrington. The daughter of billionaire Marcus Barrington, the girl everyone had once ignored. Now, she stood behind a podium center stage. The room hushed. The spotlight fell on her, a 17-year-old young woman in a soft navy blue dress, her hands calm, her expression focused. Standing beside her was her interpreter, but all eyes were on her. She raised her hands and began. "My name is Celeste Barrington," she signed slowly, clearly. "And I am deaf, but I was never voiceless." The interpreter echoed her words aloud for the hearing audience. But even those unfamiliar with ASL were entranced by Celeste's poise, her intensity, the way her hands danced with precision and purpose. For years, I felt like a painting no one looked at, a melody no one heard. People saw me, but only as a shadow of the girl I really was, because I was different, because I could not hear, and sometimes because I did not look like them. Her signs became sharper, faster, and more expressive. But then one person, one black woman with her own battles, saw me. Not just my name, not just my silence, me. Zariah sat in the front row, tears threatening to spill as she watched Celeste, pride swelling in her chest. Zariah taught me that connection is not about sound. It is about presence, and love, and truth. The audience was still, deeply moved. Today I present not just as a deaf girl, but as an artist, a leader, and a daughter of a man who finally stopped speaking for me and started learning how to speak with me. Marcus sat a few seats away from Zariah. He was emotional, his fingers silently forming small signs along with his daughter's. Celeste paused, then signed the words she had practiced for weeks. "To every young person who feels unseen, unheard, unworthy, you are not alone. You are not broken, and your story matters." The applause that erupted was thunderous, but Celeste didn't flinch. She simply smiled, placed her hand on her heart, and bowed. The girl once ignored had just moved an entire room without speaking a single word. As the last claps faded and the stage lights dimmed, something lingered in the air, something you couldn't quite name, but everyone felt. It wasn't just admiration. It was the quiet power of truth finally being heard, without sound, without apology. Outside the auditorium, guests mingled under the soft glow of street lamps. Zariah stood just off the steps, watching as Celeste laughed in animated conversation with a group of students using ASL. Her once guarded face now open, confident, joyful. Marcus approached Zariah, hands in his pockets, his usual sharp suit slightly loosened around the collar. "I owe you everything," he said, not with bravado, but humility. Zariah didn't reply right away. She looked back at Celeste, then at Marcus. "No," she said softly. "You just needed a mirror, someone to show you what you were missing." He nodded, his gaze on his daughter. "I almost lost her." "But you didn't," Zariah said. "And that's what matters." This story isn't just about a billionaire's deaf daughter, or the black waitress who dared to speak in the language no one else bothered to learn. It's about what happens when we stop talking at people and start truly seeing them. It's about how change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it starts in the most unexpected places: a hotel kitchen, a misunderstood child, a stranger's act of courage. And for every Celeste in the world, still waiting to be seen, for every Zariah, too often underestimated, let this be your reminder. Your voice matters, even when it isn't loud. Your worth is never defined by the silence of others. And your story could be the one that changes everything. This has been a Hidden Worth Black story where the unheard become unforgettable. If this moved you, don't just scroll past. Share it. Speak up. or stay quiet but stand beside someone who needs to be seen. Because sometimes, the loudest revolution begins in silence.